Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Anna Bross, Senior Vice President of Communications for The Atlantic. We are thrilled to have you here for the first day of the festival and to kick off things with this interview with Dr. Anthony S. Fauci. We're at the beautiful wharf, the historic wharf, on this gorgeous day. We welcome you here in person, and we welcome our live stream audience. Thank you so much for being with us. The 2022 Atlantic Festival features our journalists in interviews with those who are changing how we think about business, politics, culture, race, and progress. I have two practical reminders. One is if you have your cell phone on you, which most do, please silence them, but don't put them away. We want you to join the conversation using the hashtag TAF2022. Share your takeaways, share your ideas online. The second piece is that if you're not already a subscriber, you can subscribe easily at theatlantic.com, and you can become one today here in person at the festival. We have 3 full days of programming ahead for us, including our Ideas Stage interviews, which start at 2:30. So after this session, you can head down the wharf at the Mead Center for American Theater. Now it's time to get started. Without further ado, please extend a warm welcome to my colleague, our Deputy Editor, Ross Andersen, and to Dr. Anthony S. Fauci.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't always get that reception. I'm Ross Andersen, Deputy Editor of The Atlantic, and I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Anthony Fauci to our stage today. Most of us have become acquainted with Dr. Fauci during these last pandemic years, but it's worth dwelling for a moment just on the length and the distinction of his government service. Dr. Fauci actually joined the National Institutes for Health during the Lyndon Johnson administration. And
I'm old.
You might see a sepia photograph, actually, a flashback up there. But since 1984, he has been the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. And in that time, he has done groundbreaking research on HIV and spearheaded the PEPFAR program that brought HIV treatments to the developing world, one of America's finest hours by any measure. And he's advised 7 U.S. presidents from both major parties, including most recently his work as chief medical advisor to President Biden. Last month, Dr. Fauci announced his retirement, and in these last hours of his job, he has graciously allowed us to haul him out here for a conversation about his life and work. Dr. Fauci, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I want to start with a question pulled from this week's headlines and then kind of move backward in time over your career. And I'm hoping that during our conversation we'll have several occasions to hear about the kind of various textures of presidential leadership that you've experienced in your tenure. Speaking of which, on Sunday, as you're no doubt aware, President Biden gave an interview in which he said that the pandemic was over. And I wondered if you share that view, and if so, what's changed in recent weeks and months substantially to lead us there?
Well, obviously, that's the question du jour that I've gotten asked maybe 500 times since Sunday. What the president was referring to, and if you look at his entire quote, it's not incompatible with what I had said the day before, that we still have a lot of challenges ahead. What he was saying is that the fulminant phase of the outbreak, when you look months to a year ago, the numbers, we were having anywhere from 800,000 to 900,000 cases a day, and from 3,000 to 4,000 deaths per day. So that is kind of the fulminant accelerated phase of the pandemic. The cases have come down now to anywhere, and it's an underestimate, I must admit, anywhere from 50 to 100,000 a day, and the deaths are down to 300 to 400. It's kind of stuck at around 400. So the point he was making is that it's very different now, where you have a much better control, and I'm going to get to the next few words he said. We have vaccinations, we have boosters, we have the availability as of a couple of weeks ago of an updated vaccine that actually matches the circulating strain, which is the BA.5 strain, and we have antiviral drugs. So he was saying we're in a much better place with regard to the fulminant stage of the pandemic. But the next sentence he went on and said that, but we still have a lot of work to do because we're really not over with COVID. Maybe over, and it really becomes semantics and about how you want to spin it. What I have been saying, and I'll say it even to today, that 400 deaths per day is not an acceptable number as far as I'm concerned. We've got to get it down much, much lower. And the way we do that, Ross, is by utilizing the implementations and the interventions that we already have. In the United States, and again, those of you who have heard me say this on the media, it's about the 1,000th time I've said it, is that we have 67% of the population is fully vaccinated. One half of those have received their first boost. When you look at the numbers of deaths and hospitalizations of vaccinated people versus unvaccinated or unboosted people, the unvaccinated deaths and hospitalization is like this, and the vaccinated and boosted is like that. And yet, as a developed nation, we rank below many, many other developed nations and even below some low and middle income countries in utilization of things that we have plentiful of. That's the real frustration. And that's the reason why when you hear me talk, you hear frustration in my voice, because as a public health official and as a physician, predominantly is what I am, as a physician and a scientist, the only thing I care about is the health and the welfare of the individual person and of the American public in general. And yet you see the kind of thing you're alluding to is that there's this divisiveness that makes public health almost a political issue, which is ever there was a time when you didn't want something to be a political issue, is when you're going through the most devastating pandemic that we have experienced in over 100 years. It's a little bit more of a long-winded answer than I usually give, but I think it gets to the point where I think you were going.
This is the Atlantic, so we go in for long-winded.
Okay.
You've seen a lot of epidemics play out,
Right.
and is it important psychologically? You know, as you say, you're not just a scientist, right? You're a public health official, and so you have to think about the psychology of the electorate, as President Biden does, of course. Is it important for people to have a sense of a finish line, or is that?
It is, and I think that's a great question, Ross, because I think that's what the president had in mind. He was walking through some factory or something, and he was saying, look around, things are really different now than they were. And it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, you do want to have the public to have a sense so that they continue their energy of what the end game is and what the finish line is. But that's like saying, I'm on a football field and I'm running to the finish line, but just because I see what the finish line is, I'm going to stop and get a hot dog. No, you don't want to do that. You want to continue to end what we're doing. And I think that's what we're talking about. You want to see the finish line. And I think Dr. Tedros, who's the Director General of WHO, that's exactly what he said. He said the end is in sight. Now, remember, when the end is in sight for what we're dealing with now, but we have been fooled by the emergence of variants that have turned the tide on us. Remember, a year ago, as we were approaching July of 2021, we hoped that we would be free and independent. And then came Delta. We got hit badly with Delta. And then, as it turned out, I think that's the president's helicopter.
He's checking up on
He's
you.
just checking. He's checking. I'm good. I'm good.
Say it's over,
So,
Tony.
actually, it's an important point because then in November and December of 2021, we had Omicron, and we've had multiple sublineages of Omicron. So at the same time that we want to see the finish line, at the same time we're going to push as hard as we can to get people vaccinated and boosted, and at the same time as we're aware that it is possible we're going to get an out-of-left field variant coming, we still should have hope that we're going in the right direction. Now, when you're asked to give a 7-second soundbite on TV, it's really tough to get that across because they'll pull out particular words that happen to be the ones that are most attention-getting. But that's really what the situation is.
Yeah, hanging with that for a second, there's been a lot of different international approaches to this problem, to the pandemic. A whole spectrum from China's zero COVID policy, right, to, Sweden's COVID libertine policy. And we're not on either end of that spectrum, right? We've tried to pursue a balance between limiting infections and deaths and sort of continuing life as normal. And that's involved these trade-offs. And I wanted to ask you about how it is making those trade-offs in real time, because during the first year or two in the pandemic, you're in a situation where you have really hard numbers in front of you when it comes to cases, when it comes to hospitalizations, when it comes to deaths. But some of the stuff on the other side of the ledger, like school closures, you don't have those hard numbers in real time, and we're only getting them now when we see that we've had this kind of massive loss of learning over the last several years that, just like the deaths from the pandemic, tends to affect communities that can sort of least afford it. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you balance those two at the time.
Well, that's the crux of what a lot of the disagreements are right now. And one of the things that you have to make it clear, and it's totally understandable how the general public, which has a lot of other things on their mind, worrying about their families, worrying about the economy, worrying about their jobs. I don't blame them. They don't have time to delve into the intricacies of what's happening. But I can explain it maybe in some simple terms, is that when you're dealing with the evolution of an unprecedented, brand new phenomenon, things change literally from day to day, week to week, and month to month. So what at a certain time frame, it isn't like a mathematical formula where, you could come back 50 years later and the formula is still the same. It's precise, it's mathematical. But when you're dealing with the evolution of things where new information on one day would contradict information on the next day, and the next day, and the next day. A typical example, if you look at what we perceived at what this new mysterious virus is. First, we thought it wasn't transmitted particularly efficiently from human to human. So if you get asked on that day, what should you be telling the American public? What they should be concerned about? What you should be making a recommendation on? Then you find out, well, it's transmitted quite efficiently from human to human. Then you find out a week later, not only is it transmitted efficiently, but it's transmitted, two of them. It's transmitted by aerosol, and the real showstopper is that it's transmitted by 50 to 60% of the transmission from someone who doesn't even have any symptoms. So the original paradigm of if you feel sick, stay home, if you're sneezing, you might want to wear a mask or not. This was completely different paradigm. It wasn't what we call the syndromic approach. 50%, 60% of the transmissions we didn't know about. So when you tell the American public something on week one And then you get new information and you say on week 4, wait a minute, we told you this, but things are really changing. We're not changing or flip-flopping. The virus is telling us things that are different from one to the other. That led to a lot of confusion, but it's understandable confusion.
Sure.
So it isn't as if you want to blame the American public for not appreciating it. We probably could have done a better job in explaining that science and data do change from day to day and from week to week. That is difficult to do even under normal circumstances. When you have a divisiveness in society where every time you say something, you have X number of people with social media immediately looking to attack it, that adds to the understandable confusion when you're dealing with an evolving outbreak. So what you were saying, specific to your question, of course, when you make recommendations, if the primary goal, when you're dealing with a situation where the hospitals were being overrun in New York, intensive care units were being put in hallways, you have to do something that's rather draconian. And sometimes when you do draconian things, it has collateral negative consequences. Just like when you shut things down, even temporarily, it does have deleterious consequences on the economy, on the school children. You know that. But you have to make a balance. When you're dealing with, we know the only way to stop something cold in its tracks is to try and shut things down. If you shut things down just for the sake of it, that's bad. But if you do it with the purpose of being able to regroup so that you can then open up in a more safe way, that's the best way to do it. That got so garbled in people understanding why those things were done, and it led to a lot of criticism. And the criticism often gets amplified by social media, which you don't need to tell you how that works. Just kidding.
We were talking about other countries and their approaches, and I was talking to a Taiwanese friend early on in the pandemic, and she told me that she had always sort of rolled her eyes at this kind of really cheap cultural criticism binary between a really individualistic Western approach to things and a kind of Confucian sort of community-oriented approach, but that the discourse in the West around elderly people during the pandemic had made her think twice. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that this pandemic has revealed a kind of like a callousness, really, in American culture towards the elderly and the infirm?
Well, I have a great deal of faith in the American public, despite the fact that we have so much divisiveness, and I myself am the target of a lot of the attacks and the slings and the arrows, and I still have a great deal of faith in the really prevailing better angels of the American public. So I don't want to be criticizing and say there's a callousness towards that. But one of the things that I would hope either reemerges more than it has been is a realization that when you are dealing with a public health emergency of unprecedented, historical unprecedented, of course you've got to take care of yourself and be concerned about yourself. But there is such a thing as a communal responsibility that you have to society. And you see that come out in times historically, when everybody pulled together during World War II, when everybody pulled together during World War I, but I may be the only person in this room that was born before World War II started. Or also 9/11, the same sort of thing. But we're seeing now is a lot of different, disparate attitudes towards things. So we really do need to get much more of a what can we do for ourselves and our family, but what can be our contribution to society. And that's one of the reasons why when someone says, I don't really care if I get infected, the likelihood that I'm going to have a severe illness is very, very low. But, hey, you should worry about yourself, but you should also worry that you might spread it to someone else who might have a deleterious consequence.
You've been sort of coming close to the question of politicization of COVID a few times in this conversation, and I wanted to ask you about your experience with it. Here in Washington, of course, you know, we have sort of Fauci bobblehead dolls, and in Fauci we trust lawn signs and this sort of thing. But in a lot of parts of this country, that's not the case. And you know, you've
that's saying it mildly.
I have more. Remember, we're long-winded.
Hang them hard. That's not the case.
I mean, there's been. I know you've been the subject of so many conspiracy theories. You know, people have called for your arrest, if not worse. And I know culminating in really specific and significant threats towards you and your family. And I wondered if you would tell us a little bit about the emotional experience of that, you know, when it's like when you go home at night and talking with your wife.
Well, you know, there are the polar situations that you described, Ross, are both completely unrealistic. You know, the idea, I'm symbolizing something, and I understand that for people who have looked for consistency and truth and someone who could keep a calm demeanor at a time a few years ago when things were a little bit discombobulated about, you know, this is going to go away tomorrow, this drug works, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
So I didn't seek it out, but I became the symbol for people, which made it an unrealistic things like, you know, they're kind of cute, but it's, you know, bobbleheads and candles and things like that.
Do you have some at home?
They send them to me. That is as unrealistic in many respects as the craziness of people who want to decapitate me because I'm ruining the economy. Both of those things are very unrealistic. So what I've learned to do is not get taken away ego-wise with the fact that there are bobbleheads. That anybody who knows me knows that that doesn't faze me. The critics say that's really what I love in life. I really don't, trust me. Nor do I get intimidated or get totally disturbed by the threats. The thing that bothers me the most is the cruelness of the vicious attacks on my children and my wife, which tells you a little bit about the people who are doing that. I mean, I chose this life. I'm a target. That's it. My children didn't. So anyway.
You know, some of this is to be expected because these aren't purely scientific questions, right? These are naturally contested political questions in many cases. But it seems to me that it's at least possible that President Trump made the general atmosphere a lot more poisonous, that there was going to be some politicization no matter what, but that he sort of flipped the switch up on that. Do you agree?
You know, one of the problems with my saying I agree is that, boy, turn on Fox News tonight and you'll hear about it. I'm not going to get into any of the politics about things. I think the fact, and I said that multiple times and I have no hesitation to say it now, is that when I was part of the coronavirus task force and those kinds of things that were going on, like go take a drug that doesn't work or it's going to go away tomorrow like magic, I felt that I had a responsibility to myself and my own integrity and the integrity of my field of science, as well as my responsibility to the American public to speak out against that. And, you know, the people who are the far right that attack me think I really enjoyed that for political reasons. It made me very uncomfortable to have to publicly disagree with the President of the United States. I have a phenomenal amount of respect for the office of the presidency of the United States. So I didn't savor that at all. And I wish I wasn't in that position. But what that did trigger was an army of people who were very loyal to every word that the president said, who all of a sudden made me public enemy number one. And I didn't want to be public enemy number one, nor do I want to be a bobblehead. I want to be what I am, which is a scientist whose main responsibility is to preserve and protect the health and the welfare of the American public. But in all of the other stuff that's going on politically now, if you were a Martian and came in here and looked at what was going on, you'd never be able to figure that out.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the origins of COVID. There is this sort of long-running debate now between a sort of lab leak scenario and a spillover scenario. And you've said recently that you still think a lab leak scenario is very unlikely, but possible.
Absolutely.
And that we don't know yet. And I have this sense that there's a perception that among the scientific establishment, the conversation has not been as sort of open and vigorous as we might hope for a question that is of legitimate public interest, given how transformative this pandemic has been, and that there's been almost a paternalist impulse to sort of hey, let the smart people think about this, and kind of accept the official answer. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's always a suspicion. There's always the issue of something really nefarious has happened, which is understandable because that could be a possibility. And I'll say it again for the 50th time. I think you've got to keep an open mind for every possibility. But an open mind and a possibility does not equate with a probability. And that's what I think we need to look at. And if you look at what scientists from all over the world, and the conspiracy is that I sort of have these scientists on a string and I'm telling them what to do. Did you ever try and figure out what a German or a Swedish scientist would tell me if I told them what to do? I don't think it's for public consumption what they would tell me to go. They don't listen. They are of their own independent mind. And the vast majority of those people feel that you want to keep an open mind, that it should have been anything that happened. But the evidence that they have been working on for years strongly favors a natural occurrence. Does that mean it couldn't be a lab leak? Absolutely. I have a totally open mind to that. But an open mind doesn't mean there's equal probabilities of something happening, because you've got to look at what is the evidence and what are the data for one thing versus another. And when the data gives you something in a certain direction, you accept the data. Will you ever be able to definitively prove something like that? Today, unlikely. Unlikely.
Do you think, I think one of the problems, one of the things that fans the flames on this issue is the fact that this virus, its first known appearance was in China, and the government of China has not been entirely forthcoming on the issue.
Right.
Do you think they could clear this up?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. No, it is. I'm serious about that because, and again, and I want to take this in the right sense, because I'm talking about Chinese authorities, not the Chinese people. Okay, let's say that again so we don't get that distorted on a soundbite. I'm talking about Chinese authorities, not the Chinese people, not the Chinese scientists that we've collaborated with for decades and have made major contributions to our knowledge. The fact is, as a society, when something occurs that looks like, even if it's naturally coming out of China, they will be secretive about it and not want to just open up everything and say, because of this feeling that they're going to get blamed for something. SARS-CoV-1, which occurred in 2002, unequivocally, beyond a shadow of a doubt, came from a bat to an intermediate animal to a human. Everybody agrees with that. Yet if you look at the transparency of SARS-CoV-1, they were as reticent to be open and truthful about things because that's the way the leadership of the society is. Everything is, don't tell everything that's going on. So it's natural, totally natural, for conspiracy people who are thinking it's a conspiracy to say, see, they're hiding something. They probably are. You know what the thing I think would be the best thing to do would be to open up those markets and let them, no, it's too bad now the markets are closed, but the scientists who wrote those papers in Science and Cell, they have pretty definitive data that these animals, which were outlawed and not allowed to be in a market where people can be in contact with them, were actually brought there because they bring in a lot of money, people buy them for ceremonial dinners, and yet they deny that. That's the thing that you really want them to come clean on. And I think if we were able to go and do surveillance easily in China, we would get a lot more information than we have now. But again, to repeat, still keeping a completely open mind that it could have been any of the above. Lab leak, this and that, natural, whatever it is.
I want to move on to your work on HIV, but before I do that, I do have one more COVID question. And, you know, one of our instincts is quite a historically minded publication is when the coronavirus first was afoot. We tried to look back for historical analogs. You know, we looked at the Spanish flu, we looked at the Black Death to try to see if there were lessons that were learned then, which suggests to me that your decisions and your thinking during this time are going to be an object of historical scrutiny for quite a long time. And that's kind of a way of saying that you're going to be Monday morning quarterbacked a lot. And you've already seen that. And so I wanted to give you sort of just an opportunity to get ahead of your future critics. Is there anything that you regret or wish that you would have done differently of these last few years?
Yeah, I think what I would have done is that I would have tried to make it a little bit more clear that when we were saying things that were based on the data at hand, that I would have made it more clear that this may, and I said that this may change as more data comes out. You know, Ross, nobody's perfect. I certainly, least of all, am imperfect, particularly when you're dealing with this. But let me give you an example. When one of the many, many, many things that I get criticized for from the far right, and that's just the ones. I mean, I've never seen, you know, never mind. Is that early on, when we had one or two cases, and people said, should the American public do anything wrong? And I said, right now, there's no reason to change anything that, remember, like there's one or two cases, or maybe one death in 10 cases. There's nothing that you should do now to change. Semicolon. However, comma, this could change, and we've got to be ready to address it if it changes. The meme is, Fauci got it wrong from the beginning. He said, look, show this clip for the 4,000th time that right now we shouldn't be doing anything different. But they leave out, however,
the semicolon.
This could change, and we need to be prepared for it getting much worse. That is egregious misinformation, disinformation. And that's the thing that you have to deal with. So it depends on whether the Monday morning quarterbacks want to look at the semicolon and the however, or whether they want to look at that first part of the statement.
As I said earlier, a lot of people only became familiar with your work during the pandemic, but you were actually quite an early HIV researcher, and at a time when your enthusiasm for the subject was not widely shared in the scientific community. And I was wondering if you might speak a little to what kind of first interested you about that virus and what the reaction of your colleagues was.
Well, okay, I'm going to try and be concise because you're talking about a 40-year story. See if we can get it in a minute or two. Well, at this brand new mysterious disease that was killing almost exclusively young, previously otherwise healthy gay men, I have been trained and had been trained for a decade, not only trained, but practicing a combination of infectious diseases and immunology. And the two things that had me make a career decision that really transformed my career and my life was I saw a disease. This is the fall of 1981, more than 41 years ago. And I said, first of all, this is a brand new disease, which is both frightening and, for a researcher in infectious disease, extremely challenging and exciting, not a glad kind of excitement, but an ominous kind of excitement. And there's a big difference there. And I was seeing these young, wonderful young gay men coming in dramatically ill. So I said to myself, I'm trained as an infectious disease person. I'm trained as an immunologist. We don't know what this virus is because I knew it was a virus, had to be a virus. But it's a combination of whatever it is destroying the immune system. And I said, if ever there was a disease for me to study, so I put aside a very successful career up to that point and decided that with a small team that I put together, I was going to start studying these, at the time, almost exclusively young gay men. And I did it for a strong degree of empathy because that was already a disenfranchised group of people who were stigmatized against to begin with. And then they have a disease that's mysterious. It doubly stigmatized them, which struck a chord in me that that's what I wanted to do. The scientific community was not excited about getting involved in diverting resources to the disease that everybody thought was going to go away. And that's the reason why I wrote an article back in 1981 that was published in 1982 saying that anybody thinks that this is going to be like kind of a one-off that's going to go away, it doesn't really understand what an infectious disease potential pandemic is. And that's what I did. I started and I devoted the last 41 years of my life to studying HIV. The thing about it that was also when I was somewhat in conflict with the scientific community is that the gay activists out there really needed to have a voice into what was going on because the way we did science and clinical trials and the FDA regulation worked very, very well, but it was rigid in many respects. I was one of the rigid ones. The regulatory aspect was rigid. The clinical trial, if to get on a clinical trial, you had to have A, B, and C, and if you had D, E, and F, you couldn't get on the clinical trial. And they were saying, wait a minute, we're all dying here. You know, we've got to have access to some of these interventions, even though we know they don't work. So the activists try to gain the attention of the government. Because I was visible the way I am now, you know, visibility is nice, except you're a target. So I was visible then because I was one of the few people that was actually working on this new disease that didn't even have a name yet. It was called gay-related immunodeficiency. So they wanted to get the government's attention. You should be doing more, should be doing more money, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. So they started to attack me. And that's the thing you see when they show little clips of, you know, Fauci, burn him at the stake and things. The difference between that and now is that they were absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
How did you come to change your mind about that?
What I did is I said to myself, let me put myself in their position. What would I do if I were in their position? And I would do exactly what they did. I would have been throwing smoke bombs and demonstrating in front of the NIH. And what I did is that when they did that, I called them into my office. The police wanted to arrest them all. And I said, don't arrest them. Bring them to my office. I sat down and I listened to what they had to say. And what they had to say made perfect sense. It wasn't conspiratorial. It wasn't distortion of reality. It wasn't lies. There was no social media then. They just made sense. And that's when I became an ally with mostly the gay activist community, who 40 years now, at least 4 or 5 of them are my closest friends because they were right all along. They were totally correct.
Yeah, I mean, Larry Kramer, you know, famously once called you the focus of all evil in the world, but then years later said that you were the one true great hero in government for the AIDS movement.
Yeah, you know, Larry Kramer, just to mention, is a historic figure. Some of you may not know who he was. He was a firebrand gay activist who was one of the ones who wanted to gain the attention of the government, and he picked me because I'm the so-called face of the government. So he surprised me one day and figured the best way to get my attention was to write a front page magazine section of the San Francisco Examiner saying, Anthony S. Fauci, I call you a murderer, an open letter to an incompetent idiot. He got my attention. Yeah.
He was calling you a hero even before PEPFAR, which I mentioned it earlier, but this is a program that saved lives, 18 million lives, many of them in Africa, and by extending HIV treatments that were developed here all across the world. And I wonder, it's really an inspiring story, and I wonder if you, looking at your legacy and now thinking about the next Tony Fauci, your successor, are there other PEPFARs that are available where you can spend on the order of $100 billion and get that kind of life-saving impact overseas?
I think there are. For those of you who don't know the story of PEPFAR, very, very briefly, it was the best of the United States of America. The very best. Still here. It was at a time when historically we had developed the life-saving drugs that transformed the life of these individuals. The people who were dying 90% of the time now literally could lead normal lives. I mean, essentially, maybe a couple of years less life expectancy. And all over the country in the developed world that could afford drugs, lives were being saved that would otherwise be, without a doubt, a death sentence in most of the people. And what was clear is that 67% of the infections were in sub-Saharan Africa, and 95% of them were in the developing world. And that did not get lost on me. And I made multiple trips to Africa, and it was kind of like deja vu as I was making rounds in African hospitals, seeing African physicians standing around the bedside of someone who was dying in front of their eyes, recalled to me 30 years earlier when I was standing around the bedside of patients with nothing to do for them, but just, put a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. So I felt very strongly that we needed to make it available to the developing world, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Fortunately for us, in the United States, George W. Bush had the same idea. And he, because of what he said very clearly, as a rich nation, he told me this, we have a moral obligation to make sure that people throughout the world who are not as fortunate as we are from a resource standpoint don't die because of where they happen to be born. In this case, South Africa, Namibia, Guinea, all the countries that were getting killed and devastated by that. So what he did is he sent me to Africa on what was originally a fact-finding mission and asked me to put together a program that would be transforming and that would be accountable, because he knows a lot of money goes into these things that you never know what the result is. So I did that. To make a long story short, I spent the next 6 or 7 months putting together different versions of what ultimately became the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. But it was the President of the United States who, to all of the people say that every Republican hates me, this was a Republican president of the United States who was a very close friend of mine and still is, as was his father, who did something that was absolutely wonderful. And the PEPFAR program now, that was started in 2003, so it's now 2022, has saved anywhere from 18 to 20 million lives. Now, I had the thank you. I and several people like Mark Dybel and some of the staff in the White House, again, all conservative Republicans, you could just name them, Josh Bolton, Gary Etzen, Margaret Spelling, and over again. They all helped in that, but it was the President of the United States who made that decision that we're going to designate at the time $15 billion, which is now over $100 billion we spent, and we're going to do it to save lives, to prevent infection, and to care of people. that was what the United States can do at its best. So again, sorry for the long-winded answer, but we can do that with other diseases. We can do that with diseases that are predominantly domestic, and we can do that with diseases that remember the words of George W. Bush, that in many respects we have a moral responsibility as a rich nation to do that. And I still feel that way.
You know, you've been quite cagey about your retirement plans so far. And since it's just the two of us talking here, I was hoping you might say something about where we might see you resurface.
You know, Ross, I don't know exactly what venue. First of all, I'm not going to retire. As my wife so accurately says, don't even think about that. I'm going to rewire, as it were. She's a very smart lady and tells me that what it's going to be. I'm not going to retire in the classic sense. I'm stepping down from the federal government. But what I would like to do is say, somebody who has been through what I'm through, how can I further contribute to society, both domestic and global society? So I look at what I've done and I say, at my age, although I think I look pretty spry and energetic, at my age, I have a few more years to do something while I'm still energetic, I still have all my smarts, and I'm still relatively healthy. And I look at what I've been through and I say, you know, all the things you mentioned, and you very nicely historically gone through it, having the experience I've had, I've been at the NIH for 54 years, I've directed the largest research institute for infectious diseases in the world for 38 years, what can I contribute? I think what I can contribute is the benefit of my experience to hopefully inspire the younger generation of scientists and would-be scientists so that you might stimulate them to want to pursue a career in science and in medicine, and perhaps some of them will feel they may want to enter public service the way I have and the way many of my colleagues have. If I can do that by writing, by lecturing, by traveling, whether I write articles or books or whatever, to get people to be inspired, I think that that's probably the best way to spend the next couple of years before I'm too weak to do anything.
Well, speaking of that, I know you were also once a star point guard, and I play in a few basketball games around town, so if you ever want to run, I hope you'll look me up.
Yeah, I was a star point guard until I realized that a 5'7", very fast, good shooting point guard will always get completely destroyed by a very fast, good shooting 6'4" point guard.
Dr. Fauci, thanks for coming out here today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this session with Dr. Fauci. Thank you to our attendees and our subscribers. You can subscribe to The Atlantic at theatlantic.com. You can give a gift subscription. We have much more in store for you this week at the festival. Please check the Hopin app for the complete schedule and to wayfind. And we'll see you at 2:30 for the Idea Stage at the Mead Center for American Theater. Thank you so much for being with us.